What's going on, y'all? I am back once again. Today I'm going to be showing you guys the complete and full guide to tuning a chassis 1.5, and it's just going to be a full list through all the tuning options and even other stuff like the aerodynamics and the tires and whatnot. So make sure to stay tuned. In the future I might also do a video like this for 1.6 and 1.7 since they are pretty different, but they do have the same overall concept, just some more advanced settings. So anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and sub. We are on the road to 5,000 subscribers, just past 4K, so we're getting there, but we will get there. So yeah, with all that being said, let's get right into it. Alright, so starting off, we have our chassis inserted right here, and if you guys want to use the chassis that I'm using in the video today, I will leave a link to it down in the description, or you can just find it right here. It should say that it's by NVNA, but all the other ones, just ignore. These are all very old chassis. So yeah, this is the one that you want. And when we go right in and open it, you can see we have the drive seat, a chassis tune, body, misc, and wheels. And you also have your tires right here, all your gauges and whatnot, all of your engine plugins, and then down here you have your downforce. This is pretty much like where your front splitter is and whatnot, just your front downforce. And then same for the rear, but this is for like your spoiler and whatnot. So if your car spoiler is like right there, then that's where you put the downforce brick. And then you have your drag. This is like the drag coefficient of the vehicle, and you typically just put this like right inside the cabin, as long as it's kind of like in the middle, kind of low in your vehicle. Pretty much just inside the cabin is where you want it to be. Then you have your engine. This is where your noise is going to be coming from your engine, and your engine noise and exhaust is going to be different. So if your engine is up here or it's in the rear, then just put it wherever. And same with your exhaust. If you have dual exit exhaust, you can just put it right in the center, or even for like the side exits, you can just put it like right here. Just put it wherever you want it to be. And yeah, so let's get right into the meat and bones. So we have a chassis tune right here, this purple modular script. And when we hop in, the first options that you have is load delay. So this is how long it takes for your car to fully load or initialize, as it says. And then next up, you have your auto start. This pretty much means that the car will automatically start if you go into the driver's seat. And if you want to turn the car on by yourself, so like a custom ignition, you can set this to false. And next up we have auto flip. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you want to manually flip it, you will have to use a plugin, but I just always put on auto flip. You know, it's like not really a big issue. And next up we have your suspension / wheel values. So you have your camber, and camber of course is where your wheels kind of tilt in from the outside, mainly used in stance cars and drift cars and whatnot. And you have caster. If you don't know what caster is essentially the tilt angle of your suspension. Positive caster just leans your suspension backwards, and negative leans it forwards, and unchanged just keeps it how it typically is. This doesn't really do too much performance wise, but it can be a slight improvement. However, I just wouldn't touch it personally, unless your real car has any caster adjustments. So, and then your toe, if you also don't know what toe is, the toe of your car's wheels is like how much they're like turned in. So it's not like camber, how they're kind of like, I guess you could say like the side of the wheel. Positive means that your wheels are turned inward, and negative is vice versa, they're kind of facing out. Again, I wouldn't touch this unless your car has a specific value for it. And next you have your weight. This is going to be your weight in pounds. When it comes to 1.6 and 1.7, it will be in kilograms, but right here it's in pounds. So you just want to do that to your real life spec. And then here's your weight brick. So you can put in your real life car's dimensions if you want. I typically don't really do this. I just kind of just wing it and typically skip this. But if you really want to be as accurate as you possibly can, like if you're replicating your real life car or something, then you can just put in your real life car's dimensions and divide it by 10 like it says right here. For your width, your height, and your length. And then you have your weight distribution. So a higher distribution, or like a higher value right here, pretty much means that it's more weight on your front wheels, and a lower value means that it's more weight on your rear wheels. It also explains it right here, so you can just look this up. A lot of this you can just look up for your personal car. And then you have your center of gravity height. So for performance cars, it's typically going to be pretty low, but on like an SUV it's going to be pretty high and whatnot, so you get the gist of it. And then your weight brake, always set this to false, otherwise your car is just going to be a big block on wheels. So yeah, just leave that to how it is, unless you want to do like testing or whatever. And then you have your wheel density. It's pretty much like the hardness of your wheel, which doesn't really do much at all. But if your wheel is higher value, it can slightly affect your suspension over bumps and whatnot, because it's going to be, you know, a harder wheel. I wouldn't mess with it personally. I just leave it. And then next you have your axle size. This is the size of the structural members. So larger is more stable and it can carry a lot more weight. So this is really going to be on like off-road vehicles or trucks. So this is essentially just for like towing capacity, just for how heavy your vehicle is. And then you have the density of it, which is also how hard it is, which also is similar to this, where it just affects your suspension quite a bit. It's not really a big difference. You can't really tell unless you like push it to the limits on like an off-road course or something, but there's a change regardless. And then you have your custom suspension density. This is the density of the suspension joints, and you always want to leave this at 0.01. You never want to put it at 1 or 0.1. You always want to leave it at 0.01, otherwise your car would drive like trash. I learned the hard way with my very old slot cars. And then you have your suspension enabled, so this is kind of a no-brainer. You always want your suspension to be enabled unless you want like a like an old Roblox 2000s car or something. And then next up you have the rest of your suspension settings. So this is your front suspension stiffness or your spring force. This is going to be like how hard your suspension is, how stiff it is, as it says right here, of course. And then you have your damping. Damping is like how bouncy your car is. If your damping value is lower, your car is going to be a lot more springier, but if it's higher, it's going to be a lot more stable and controlled. And your base spring height is pretty much just the stock ride height of your vehicle. So if you have like a SUV or a truck that's lifted, then you're going to put it a bit lower, and vice versa. And then you have your pre-compress, which just adds to the base spring height, so it makes it even taller. I recommend doing this instead of just lifting up the car body to make it taller over the wheels. And then you have your max extension travel. This is how much the suspension extends. So if you have like a let's just say like a trophy truck or whatever, then this is going to have a higher extension travel because it's going to like spring up a lot more, if that makes any sense. And then you have your max compression travel. So this is going to be how much your car like lowers when you brakes, if that makes sense, how much it's going to compress. And typically it's a higher value for the front suspension than the rear suspension because the rear is typically more stiff. And then you have your Euro damping. I wouldn't really touch this. If you don't know what Euro damping is, it's pretty much similar to just regular damping. However, if you have it too high, it can cause jittering, and too low can make the car lose controller faster. So I just leave it how it is, unless you have a specific value. And everything that I just said for the front strut also applies to the rear strut. And down here we have more suspension settings. However, this is for the old suspension settings. This is not really for the new suspension settings, so I'm not really going to go over it too much, but I will say that the suspension angle is just how much your struts are angled in. This is typically to like manage the ride height and handling, mainly for performance cars. Sometimes luxury cars it does heavily vary, but you can mess with it yourself. Just make sure to keep the script open, that way you can undo and redo your values. And then your wishbone length. The wishbone length affects your car's camber gain during their suspension travel, so longer wishbones do help with like track width to reduce unwanted camber. And it's just overall better if you have a performance car, but if you do have like a commuter car, then you can just leave it how it is, doesn't really matter. And then the wishbone angle is pretty much the same story as the front suspension angle, but it doesn't really do as much. I just kind of leave it if I were you, unless you have a specific value. And then you have your anchor offset. The anchor offset is like the non-center positioning of the suspension mounting components, like the control arms, the shocks, and all that, relative to the car chassis. In English, offset is typically used in racing or off-road vehicles, mainly off-road vehicles to make clearance for larger tires. So do with that information as you will. It's just for the rear, so everything I said here applies to down here. And then aesthetics, the suspension right here, this is part of the aesthetics, and if you set it to false, you can make it invisible, that way it doesn't show up when you press play. And here's the suspension radius. I'll just show you what it looks like when I go in. Actually, I should set this to true if I want to do that. You can see that the springs are quite a bit thicker, and if I put it a bit lower, and when I go in, you can see that it's a lot thinner right there. So that's just for aesthetics, but you probably will never do that because you're gonna have your own suspension, of course, so this all doesn't really matter, but I'm just gonna go over it regardless. And then you have the coil thickness, which is self-explanatory, and then the color of it, and then coil count, so how many like rings there are, I guess you could say, I don't know. And then you have the wheel stabilizer Euro. This is kind of similar to what we talked about right above, where it stabilizes the car's motion, which is very similar to regular dampening. However, too high again can cause jittering and just make it feel bad, and too low can make it more sucky to drive, easy to spin out. And next we're going to be moving on to the steering. I definitely recommend new steering. The old steering is pretty garbage, even on this version, so I just do new steering, which is more precise based on real life calculations. So we have the steering ratio right here. This is the steering ratio of your steering rack. Performance cars are typically going to be like 16:1 or whatever. But again, you do have to Google it for your car. And then for commuter cars, it is like slightly lower. It's just like how good your steering is and how good your turning radius is. And then you have your lock to lock. This is how many turns it takes for your steering wheel to lock in a position, so until you can't turn it anymore. And then you have your Ackerman. It says that if you don't know what it is and don't touch it, ranges are 0.7 to 1.2. And the Ackerman pretty much linkages for the suspension that enables the front wheel to turn sharper at a greater angle than the outside. It reduces the tire scrub, the wear, and steering instability. It's very car specific. I'd recommend to just leave it like this, as it says, but it is mainly used for low speed maneuvering. But for performance cars, a higher value can cause tire temperatures, which can wear your tires faster, which is not good. And for the old options right here, you have steering inner. This is just like the steering angle. And for general steering, this is for the new steering. So you have your steer speed, which is of course how fast your wheel moves when you go to steer it. And then you have your return speed, so how fast it goes back into its regular straightforward position. Then you have your steer decay. This is like how much you can turn at a specific speed. So if you're going like 200 miles per hour, of course you can't turn that much at all. And it shows the speed gradient cutoff, so like 200 miles an hour. I don't know how much that would be in studs per second. You would have to calculate this, but yeah, it's just how much you can turn at a specific speed. Then you have the minimum steering and max decay. So this is the steering percentage. It is like kind of confusing, but it doesn't really matter much at all. This is kind of just all up to this. So I wouldn't touch that. It should be fine if you just leave it. This is like more advanced options. But anyways, next up we have the steering dampening. And steer dampening suppresses the amount of unwanted side-to-side vibrations or weird movements for the vehicle steering. It's mainly used on motorcycles and sport bikes, as well as some off-road vehicles for better high-speed control on rough terrain. Essentially, higher values is less twitchiness, but it can be a lot more stiff or feel pretty tight. And then we have like two options right here that are pretty similar, but steering force is like I don't know how to explain it because it's similar to aggressiveness, but it's just like the higher the number, the more forceful it's going to steer around corners and how much it's going to attack corners. And then steering aggressiveness is essentially like how sensitive it is when you turn. So on keyboard and mouse, it's definitely going to be a lower value to be more smoother. And if you use keyboard, it's probably gonna be around this value or so. So essentially they do very similar tasks, just a bit differently. For four-wheel steering, I imagine you guys won't really use this that much unless you have like an EV or a Honda Prelude or something. It says it right here, so you can deactivate it by just putting none, which is a default. But if you want four-wheel steering to activate at a certain speed, then you just type in speed right there. For static, it just like completely deactivates that, so it's just four-wheel steering all the time. But let's say you wanted to go from four-wheel steering to just regular steering like a Honda Prelude, then you can just do both. And then it says it right here at which it fully activates. And then you have the speed of gradient cutoff, which is also similar to the steer decay, where at a certain speed it just doesn't really steer that much at all. And then next we have rear steer Euro turning. What I just said like up here as well, I do recommend avoiding changing those, but I personally change them quite a bit, especially if you don't like the standard steering force and aggressiveness. So it's not bad to change it, but you just want to kind of avoid it. So all this up here applies to down here. So right here, this is where like you're going to be doing most of the magic. So you have your horsepower. This is your naturally aspirated horsepower before adding forced induction. And you really want to test out this naturally aspirated horsepower value when you do have aspiration, because I want to say twin turbos add at least like 300 horsepower or more than that, like 400 horsepower maybe on this chassis. And then next up you have your engine idle. This is what RPM your engine idle is at, so you just Google that for your car. And then this is where your horsepower reaches its peak. Your horsepower doesn't reach peak at the max redline RPM. It's like at a slightly lower RPM like this right here, this example. And then this is your rev limiter, of course, your red line. This is how fast your power drops off past the peak horsepower, so how fast it goes down to a certain value after the horsepower reaches its peak. And then you have your curve multiplier. So a higher value, a higher decimal, means a peakier power curve, and lower values just means that it's smoother. And then you have your EQ point right here. It is standardized. It says to not touch it and add take their word for it, because I did try looking it up, but the stupid Google AI thingy just keeps mentioning the Mercedes EQ, which I don't want. So do with that as you will at your own risk. Then you have the compression ratio. You do want to Google this value for your car, but it's pretty much like how much compression the car has with forced induction. I'm not really too educated on that, but you know, you can just Google it and find out for that. And then you have your electric engine. I am just giving a heads up, I'm going to be terrible at explaining this, because not only am I not an electric car guy, but half of this I don't even know what it means, and half of this I couldn't even look up on Google. So I couldn't really do my research on this. So false, of course, means that you don't have any electric motor. But the cool thing is that with 1.5, you can actually have a hybrid vehicle. So you can have an electric motors, like your real hybrid car if you're doing one. And you can also have your engine. So that's pretty awesome. Then you have your electric red line. So as you might see with some electric cars, if you've ever been in one or driven one in a game, the red line is usually really high, typically like this amount right here for an example. Since it's just like one gear pretty much. Well, it can't be 2 gears, but it's pretty much kind of 1 gear most of the time. But yeah, it's a high red line, so that's your red line. And then E-Trans 1 and E-Trans 2, I don't really know what this means at all. I'm assuming this is I can't assume because I don't know what that means. I swear I tried to Google, and I even asked ChatGPT, and it had no clue. So but you have your electric horsepower right here, and your N percent, I don't know what that means. And then you have your electric torque, different from your horsepower, of course. That's separate, unlike your engine. So yeah, I don't know what the multiplier stuff means when it comes to the electric stuff. So again, I apologize for that, but it's just the info on this is super scarce, and frankly I don't really care that much because electric vehicles drive like trash on 1.5 anyway. So I wouldn't recommend it, but do at your own risk. Then you have your aspirations, of course. You have your turbocharger and your supercharger. Turbochargers, this is how much that your car has. So if you have 2, you do 2, etc. And then you have your turbo boost. This is how much boost that your turbos put out, just how much power it gives you. So a higher value, of course, means that it's gonna, like, you know, just absolutely destroy and blow up your engine. Then you have your turbo lag, so a higher value means it's going to be more laggy, and if you set it to 0, there's going to be like no lag at all. And then you have your secondary turbo boost lag, and this is only for if you have 2 turbos. So if you want like a sequential, then you just set it to the same value, or you can just have it be a higher lag if you want, whatever you want to do. Then you have your supercharger, similar to the turbo when it comes to the boost value right here. Higher means more boost coming out of it. And then your sensitivity, this is going to be how much boost it generates for how much throttle that you put in. And you can also twin charge, I should mention. So you can do 1 supercharger, 1 turbocharger, and twin charge if you want. Then you have your MISC, you have your throttle acceleration. This is like, I recommend putting this to 1 if you have a modern car. This is how sensitive your throttle is, but I recommend putting it to 1 most of the time. Or if you have like a modified older car, then put it to like 0.08 or something. Then you have your throttle deceleration. I typically leave this, but this is like, but this is just how fast your engine speed decays. And you have your brake acceleration. So I typically keep it stock, of course, but if you have pretty sensitive brakes, then you can put it higher. Then you have your brake deceleration, which is similar to this, but it's not really too much of a noticeable change. I wouldn't really touch it much. And then you have your rev excel. This is the RPM acceleration when the clutch is off. So if you're like revving in neutral or something, then higher will make it rev up to redline faster, and vice versa. And this is your rev decay. So let's say that you add like a pretty high cruising speed, but you don't want your speed to decay that fast, and you would put this value to be pretty low. But just make sure that it doesn't like mess up your car's RPM or anything, especially at idle. And then you have your rev bounce. This is how much RPM kickback that you have from the red line. So for like a old V8 Tahoe or something, then it's going to be a way lower value. But if you have like a modern supercar or something, it's going to be a higher value. And you can definitely see the difference when you go in and test your car out when you rev it in idle. Then you have your percent throttle at your idle. So this is essentially like how much your car would roll in idle, or just like your creep kind of, I guess. I put it to like 1% or so because I don't really want my car rolling. So that's just me though. Then you have your flywheel weight. So it says it right here, higher equals faster response, lower is more stable. So you can do that as you want, depends on your car. Then you have your incline comp. So this is like how much torque you gain when you're on an incline. So it's pretty common in most racing games that you might see. There's actually some scenarios where you can like squat your car and it like boosts it just by itself. But right here you can just change it if you want. So if you want a boost when going up a hill, then you do a higher value. And then here's your drivetrain. Of course, you have all-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, and it's just you know, if you want front-wheel drive, do that, simple. And then you have your torque vector. This is for all-wheel drive only. So a lower value means 100% front bias, and then the higher value rear bias, and then 0 is just 50-50. So this depends on your car. If you have like a front heavy all-wheel drive car, like a Audi Quattro or something, then the value is probably going to be pretty low. So just, you know, something like that, if you want to think about it. So it's just a little change right there that you can do. Then you have your differential type. I always keep this at new. Again, a lot of the old settings just aren't good at all unless you like really know what you're doing. But you do have your slip and your lock thresholds for your differential. By definition, differential, lock, and slip thresholds is usually the difference in rotational speed between your left and right wheels, or excessive slippage that can cause automatic locking to engage, which in English means that the whole system locks the axle shafts together to provide all the available leftover torque to the wheels to create better traction. But I would just leave this alone because these settings are pretty exclusive to like off-road vehicles or semi-trucks and just other big vehicles. It can also apply to some race cars potentially, but yeah, it's just so you know what ballpark that this is in. And the same options are pretty similar to the new ones, but it kind of explains it a bit better right here. So there you go. You probably won't really touch this at all. I don't think I've ever touched this because it just doesn't change much for me, but that's just me. Then you have your traction control settings. So at default it's set to true, but if you have like an 80s car or something, and make sure that when you put it to false, it's in all lowercase and not all uppercase, otherwise it's not going to register. So yeah. Then you have your slip speed allowed before the traction control starts working in steps per second. And you can calculate the steps per second, or you can just kind of guess, test it to see if it's like near the speed that you want, because steps per second is pretty much like a higher value than kilometers per second, but you know, they're pretty similar. Then you have your traction control gradient. So this is the slip speed gradient between 0 to max reduction. Then you have your traction control limit, so the minimum amount of torque at max reduction, in percent of course. So this is a percentage value right there. Don't forget that if you want to change it. So you have your clutch, which you're pretty much always going to have set to true. Change it to false for the chassis to act like AC6 81T. You do not want to change it to true, trust me, just always leave it at true. And then you have your transmission mode. So this is standard, semi, manual, auto, you know, pretty brief. And then you have your clutch modes. So you can do either the new one or the old one. Of course, I would definitely keep the new one, because the old one was based on speed and RPM control clutch engagement, but with the new one it's just based on speed clutch engagement, which is a lot better in my opinion when it comes to driving experience. I have tested both, but I definitely like the new one quite a lot more. Then you have your clutch type. So you have 3 different options right here. So you have clutch, torque converter, and CVT. And the difference between these is that a torque converter is more smooth for low end power, so pretty much a bit better for cars that aren't performance oriented, like a Buick or Land Cruiser or something like that along those lines. While a standard clutch, as you guys probably know by now, is a lot better for performance and speed efficiency, and CVTs are just pure garbage. Never do this unless you're making a troll vehicle or like a modern Nissan commuter car for some reason. And the reason they suck is because it's pretty much like an automatic transmission. It has like controlled RPMs, like they shift like an automatic, but they stay at like a medium/high RPM constantly. It's super hard to explain. You'll have to see like a full video on it if you want to understand better. It even says found in scooters, so yeah, it's just yikes. And then you have stall. So this doesn't apply to like a real life situation when it comes to like manual. So if you have the clutch off while you're in first gear, it won't stall, but it does still stall the car if you're driving it in manual. An ignition plug-in would be pretty necessary for this. Then you have your clutch release. This option is kind of annoying. So it pretty much means that you have to let your foot off the gas if you want to switch into a higher gear. So it is like realistic to real life, but it is pretty annoying as a Roblox feature, because when you race in Roblox and car games, you typically just have your pedal to the floor and just yamming gears, so I just keep this at false. Then you have your clutch engage. This is how fast your clutch engagement is. So like right here it says like 0 is instant and then 99 is super slow, like granny shifts. So yeah, and it's also based on your speed, so you definitely want to leave it at a low value. Then you have your speed engage. This is the speed that the clutch fully engages at. So it's like the same as these values right here. So this is the speed that the clutch fully engages at. So this is like 20 steps per second. But if you have a commuter car, it's probably going to be like a higher value, and for a performance car, I guess it doesn't really matter. This is another like advanced setting that doesn't really change a lot at all unless you're picky about realism. Anyways, next up you have clutch kick, and clutch kick is a pretty like known term in the car community. But if you don't know the concept of it, it pretty much means just like quickly pressing and releasing the clutch while accelerating to hold slippage while drifting or getting around corners if you're losing power. So it pretty much just puts more power to your back wheels to keep them spinning when you're drifting and whatnot. If you played Roblox car games at all, or just any car game, then you probably did this if you drove manual. Then you have your kick multiplier. This is like how like instant it is, if that makes sense. I don't really know how to explain it. The multiplier values are kind of confusing for me, so I apologize if I am inaccurate on that. And then you have your clutch old mode. This is like the clutch RPM multiplier, but I'd recommend just keeping it here like the chassis says. It doesn't really do much at all. It doesn't really benefit you. I just leave it as is. I don't really know too much about it because it's like not really important at all. So there's that. You can play around with it if you want. Then you have your torque converter tuning, which is just a torque converter lock, and this is when it starts locking at a certain RPM, so pretty similar to CVT kind of. And there's even the torque converter and CVT option right here, where it says RPM engage, and it keeps RPMs at this level until it's passed. So unless you rev it to your red line or go at max speed, it's going to stay at this RPM when accelerating. And then you have your neutral rev limiter. So default is set to false, and this is only really for cars that have a rev limiter. So like the modern Honda Prelude or something, you might just leave this at like the idle RPM and put it at true or something. But yeah, enables a different red line RPM for when the car is in neutral. And then this is the rev limiter when the car is in neutral right here. This is your RPM value. And then there's the limit clutch, which will also limit the RPMs even when you have the clutch pressed down. So if you're a manual and you hold down the clutch and you try to redline it, it will keep it at the RPM limiter, rev limiter. And then you have your automatic settings. So there's two options right here. You have speed, then you have RPM, which shifts based on the RPM. So pretty self-explanatory. I just leave it at speed. It doesn't really make too much of a difference, but you can test it out and see what you like more. It's just personal preference. And then you have your auto shift type. So you have rev, which means that the clutch engages fully once the RPM is reached, or even at like a peak horsepower RPM or something. And then you have your DCT, which is used in like a lot of modern cars and a lot of racing cars, where it's the clutch engages after a set time has passed. So you want to leave it at DCT though. Nobody really uses rev anyway. Then you have your auto shift reverse. New means that you shift from reverse, neutral, and drive, and then old means that auto shifts into ROD when stopped. So I don't really like the old one. It's like really weird to operate, and I don't really like it too much. It's like a less realistic automatic essentially. And then you have your auto up threshold and your auto down threshold. These thresholds typically occur between like 2000 and 3000 RPM. In real life, this is mainly just for fuel efficiency, and this means that the transmission will shift into your higher gear based on the engine's RPM, car speed, and load, typically targeting low RPMs roughly between, I want to say like 1500 or 2000 RPM ish. So this is pretty much if you have a commuter fuel efficient vehicle like a Toyota Matrix or something. Shift throttle. This is the throttle level when you're shifting down to rev match. So it's at 100%, so it's just 100%. And then you have automatic DCT. So this is the amount of time that it takes to shift into a higher and a lower gear. So if you have like a modern supercar, it's typically just going to be 0. But if you have like a manual, like Malaise era sports car or something, then this is probably going to be like 0.45 or something. And right here you have your gear ratios. So the best way I can summarize gear ratios, the higher the decimal is going to be. So if I put it to like 3.9, the gears are going to be shorter. And this is the final drive, so this is taking all of these gears and it's keeping these values, but it's just making everything kind of more compressed into one, kind of shrinks all the gears, so it kind of like shortens or lengthens the gears, if that makes sense. The only thing that I can say I don't really know is the neutral gear. I don't really know how you tune this. I have never seen anybody change this, but yeah, so if you want like a shorter gear, you can do like 2.3, and if you want to like tune them pretty well, I do recommend leaving like a 200 deficit between different gears. So this is at 2.3, so I recommend putting it at like 2.1, etc. So you get the whole gist of it. It's pretty simple. It just takes some experimenting and getting used to. Then you have your ratio multiplier. Just keep it at 1 if the car isn't struggling with torque, but if you have a low torque vehicle, then maybe put it to like 2 or 3 or 1.5 or whatever. Then you have ABS, and the default is true. ABS just means that your brakes don't lock up when you brake, and the threshold is the slip speed allowed before the ABS starts working. And then you have your brake force. This is like how much power that your brakes have, so how fast your car will slow down. Then you have your brake bias, so a higher decimal means more front brake bias, you know, vice versa. Then you have your handbrake force. This is how much braking power your handbrake has, which is typically going to be quite a lot higher. And then you have your handbrake bias, which you're normally not really going to change. It just is what it is, but you can have a front bias or rear bias if you want, but it's up to you. Then you have your engine braking. This is like how fast you slow down when you don't press on the brakes and you like redline your car or something, and you just kind of let the engine like naturally slow itself down. And it is typically pretty low, so I just kind of leave it how it is mainly. And then we are finally at the end. We have all of your control mappings down here. That's all your keyboard mappings, and you have your mouse controls, controller controls. Yeah, it's all your personal preference, and that's it. That's it for the main module of HSS 1.5. So let's go down and let's review the rest, and then we can finally end off the video. Because man, I've been talking for nearly an hour at this point. So for your plugins, the default ones are all right here. None of this is additional. So you have your AC6 M stereo camera. You don't change this. This is just a for your default camera. So I just don't mess with that at all. I just keep it. I always keep it. Even if you have a camera plugin, probably just keep it so it doesn't break anything. And then you have your aerodynamics, which are really simple. So you have your drag coefficient, and this is pretty much how aerodynamic your car is. And then you have your downforce right here. So again, if you have like a track car or a hypercar, it might be like 700 or something for the front and rear values. Then you have your volume. I'm just gonna say it, put this at 0, because if you leave it at 1, you will always hear that kind of squeaky chassis sounds whenever you're driving at high speed, and it's super annoying. And it's just a yeah, I don't like the sound at all. So just set that at 0. And that is the end of all the edible values, so we can ignore the rest. And then you have your engine sounds. I did briefly go over this in previous videos, but here are the Roblox IDs of all your sounds right here, of your desired sounds. Then you have your exhaust volume. So if you want a higher volume, you can go to like 0.8 or something, or like 1.2. And if you want a lower value, just go to like 0.3 or 0.09 or something like that. Then you have the exhaust roll-off max and the roll-off minimum. So this is like how far people can hear your sounds. So just put it to higher if you want your sounds to be heard from a long distance, and put it lower for vice versa. And it's like that for all the rest of these values, the same overall premise. And then for some of them, you're already going to have like a pitch option. So you have your exhaust pitch and engine pitch. This is like, of course, how high pitched your engine and your exhaust is. So this is all based on your car. So if your sound is too low, then you can bump it up. But if it's too high pitched, then you can bump it down quite a bit. Then you have your exhaust rev and your engine rev. This is like I'm pretty sure this is like the base playback speed, which isn't really too different from your pitch, but I just kind of leave it how this is, and then just mess with your pitch. In the equalizers, this is very vague information. I don't know what this means, but I've never touched it. So I say that's, you know, it's fine not editing it at all, especially if you're going to be using aftermarket sound plugins anyway. Then you have your throttle volume multiplier and your pitch multiplier. So similar to the multipliers up above, where it's just like it can be multiplied by a certain amount to reach a certain pitch faster or a certain volume faster. For the distortion as well, I don't really like distortion personally. I'd rather just keep my cars clean sounding, you know, not really as distorted at all. just crispy engine sounds. So and that's the end of all that, so you don't got to worry about anything else down there. Then you have your induction sounds, which is the same exact premise. Just to save time, I won't really go over these. All I will say is that the BOV sensitivity, and also if you don't know what the BOV is, it's like a that's what that is. And if you set it to a higher sensitivity, then it's going to make that noise at a lower amount of boost. Then you have your ignition plugin, which is self-explanatory. You don't touch the script, but you can edit the font and what the text is when you get inside the car down here. So there's the font right there, and there's the text. And then you have the stock gauges. You can also edit this if you want, but I'd recommend just putting in aftermarket gauges that you can find all over Toolbox or just Discord servers and whatnot. Then you have your controls module. You don't want to touch any of this unless you want to customize the text for some reason or some of the colors, but you just want to leave that alone. Then you have your horsepower and torque reader. This doesn't really matter. You can remove this if you don't want to see your horsepower and your torque, if you don't really care about that. But if you do care about that, then don't really touch it at all. And then the last thing that you have in the plugins that's worth mentioning is the tires. And I'm just gonna say, don't really worry about the default tires too much because they suck and it's just like infinite grip pretty much. But you can tune them here, and none of this is edible down there. You have your wear speed, your target friction, so how much grip you want your tires to have, and then how fast your tires can wear. This is like your wheel properties. I wouldn't really worry about that though. I've never changed that, so I wouldn't worry about that at all. But you have your tire slip and your spin and lock ratios, which is kind of similar to what we talked about when it came to the ABS and traction control stuff. So yeah, there's everything that is worth mentioning in the plugins. And then next up, moving away from the plugins, we have initialize. So you're pretty much never going to do anything in the initialize script itself. This doesn't really matter, just don't touch any of this, but you will be touching the misc weld. And I have covered this in my previous slot car tutorials, where if you do like a steering wheel, sometimes if you import a model, it will say like paste it to misc weld. Essentially, this is what it's talking about. Down here where it says weld stuff here, this is where you want to paste your misc weld. It's just copy and paste lines of code. And the reason why most of it might break for you guys is because you either didn't paste the code into there, or that code doesn't correlate with what's in misc weld. So if one tiny thing is missing inside of the misc, but the code for it is in the misc weld, it won't register and it'll be like, what the hell, it's not in there, so it just breaks. And moving on to the readme, doesn't matter, you can get rid of it if you want. It's just telling you like the updates if you're interested in that. Yeah, not much to say. And then finally we have the values. So this is the HS's interface. Do not touch any of this too. This is another thing that you don't really touch. This is kind of like what the car runs on. This is essentially like all the communication that the chassis makes with itself, if that makes sense. So when it comes to the wheels, there's not really much worth mentioning. In my previous slot car videos, I did kind of mention how to set up your wheels. So I'll just kind of go over the group types. So you have your parts right here. This is where you put your actual wheel in, of course, your wheel model. So if your wheel has like a wishbone, like a modeled wishbone, or it's just a modeled suspension components that you don't want to spin around, then you can just put it into suspension fixed. Then you have a suspension geometry. So don't touch any of this, of course. This is all done in the HS's tuner. And then you have wheel fixed. This is where your disc and your caliper and your drum brakes are gonna go and whatnot. Yeah, that is the full guide to HS's 1.5. I know this video is stupidly long, but it is a very full in-depth guide. The recording right now says that it's just over an hour, so hopefully this video is like 40 minutes maximum. And part of that is just that I explain stuff very in depth and there's like a lot to go over here. I mean, come on, like I explain almost every line of this in full detail. So, and let me know if you want me to do a video on 1.6 or 1.7. It's essentially going to be the same exact thing. Please don't suggest it. I don't want to talk for an hour again. And if you like these types of tutorial videos, make sure to check out my slot car tutorial playlist. I have a bunch of videos on that I've been making for months. So yeah, with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys, and I'll catch y'all later. See ya.